The presentation which we prepared together with Henrietta Martinakova from UNDP Bratislava is focused on SCA in former Soviet Union countries. It would have been very logical that since the presentation is mainly based on experience from UNDP activities and UNDP support in these countries, it would have been quite logical that Henrietta is presenting it. However, unfortunately she has to be in Astana, where is some meeting obviously a bit more important than our conference.
Just slightly.
Yeah, just slightly. At the beginning, let me briefly present the very short overview of the status of SCA in the region. I think we can distinguish the three stages of SCA development in the countries, in former Soviet Union countries. There is Belarus, which already has legislated the SCA Act, which is more or less similar to the requirements, for example, of UNEC protocol or SCA directive, and they are starting just now with kind of standard application of SCA mainly for national programs as well as for spatial plans. Then in the second group of countries, they are in the stage of pilot application of SCA, mainly, as I said, funded by UNDP, like in Armenia, Ukraine, or Crimea, or just now the World Bank has opened the tender for the first SCA in Azerbaijan for Baku Spatial Development Plan. So this is the second group of countries having already some certain experience with the SCA application, and then the rest of the countries is still at the stage of capacity building, which means they got some trainings were organized on SCA, some guidance, recommendations were drafted. For example, just recently, in March, the training was organized in Kazakhstan supported by UNEC Secretariat, Protocol Secretariat, where people from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan participated. So this is in brief the status of SCA development in the region. However, when talking about the SCA in former Soviet Union countries, it's probably good to mention the existing environmental assessment systems in the region, and then to compare and discuss how it can be linked to SCA. So generally, the existing environmental assessment systems are still based on the procedures evolved in 80s in Soviet Union. And there are two systems. The first one is called OVOS, which is Оценка воздействия на окружающую среду, and it can be translated as IAIA, basically. It's supposed to be applied for projects, assessing the specific environmental impacts of proposed activity on the surrounding environment. It should be ensured by project developer, and so it's very similar to IAIA. And the second level or second part of the system is so-called state ecological expertise or state ecological review, which is aimed at verifying the compliance of proposed projects and activities with environmental standards. It's usually done by the Ministry of Environment, and it means that the project developer has to submit the project if OVOS is required together with the OVOS report, and then the Ministry of Environment circulate it throughout all the departments, and they just check whether it's in compliance with the legal standards. So it's very formal. It's a very formal exercise. There is no baseline analysis or impact analysis. It's just comparing the project or EIA report with legal standards and legal requirements. Here the table presents just very brief overview of differences or similarities between EIA or OVOS, State Ecological Expertise, and SCA. I already mentioned that the EIA is supposed to be applied for specific projects, the same State Ecological Expertise. However, in theory, it's supposed to be applied also for plans and programs. However, in practice, there are only few cases when it has been done so. it's required usually by legislation, however, well, the reality doesn't reflect it in these countries. And then the SCA, well, should be focused on integrating of environmental sustainability issues into the planning and decision making. Regarding the scope of assessment or analysis to be done, although it's EIA more or less, so it should include a description of environment, impact analysis, mitigation measures, and report has to be submitted to environmental authority. I already mentioned that state ecological expertise doesn't require any analysis to be done, but it results in SCE statement, so-called, which is mandatory for the project developer or for the plan developer. Well, the description of SCA is obvious, so I think there is no need to go through. Consultation, in theory again, it should be carried out within both EIA and state ecological expertise. However, practice shows that the current level or scope of public consultations is very, very limited. Regarding the plans and programs, one of the reasons is that quite often the plan and program itself cannot be published. So that's why, I mean, because of the other legal requirements, it cannot be published, and that's why also any environmental report related to the plan and program is difficult to consult with public. And in terms of the decision making, OLOS or EIA is submitted further in state ecological expertise process, which, as I already mentioned, results in the statement, which is mandatory. That means the project developer or the plan developer, that means, for example, some sectoral ministry, has to follow the requirements of the statement. So it's legally mandatory. Compared to usual or standard status of SCA, which is supposed to have a recommendatory character, this is one of the main differences. And now the question is what could be or should be the link between SCA, once introduced in the country, and existing system of state ecological expertise, because they have a different mandate. Statements now are mandatory, however, while SCA has recommendatory nature, but I believe there is a potential for mutual reinforcing. One possible approach is that SCA, when it's applied, could integrate the state ecological expertise as a kind of quality review or quality assurance. This means the SCA report would have to be submitted to environmental authority, and environmental authority would do the quality check, and at the end probably again issue the statement. But then the important question is whether, and yeah, it would be great to have your opinion on that, whether SCA should follow the existing system. That means the final SCA results would be also mandatory for plan developer or program developer, or should we rather promote the SCA as it is perceived here, for example, in Europe, that means to have a only recommendatory character. It has some pluses and minuses. Definitely, if we follow this approach, that means SCA would follow the traditional system and be mandatory, it would give certain strength to the outputs and conclusions, because when talking to people from the region, they quite often say, well, if it's not mandatory, nobody will pay attention. So this is how it works. However, I'm a bit afraid that such approach might lead to perception of SCA as a burden, and then any institution or organization trying to introduce the SCA in the country would be under there would be a strong opposition of sectoral ministries or even government having another, let's say, legally mandatory system. So it's still an open question, and it needs to be further discussed. Some key findings and lessons learned from, as I mentioned, mainly from UNDP activities in the region. What is very important, and this is one most significant reasons why countries in the region are trying to introduce SE into country. They are mainly driven by UNEC protocol and its requirements, and also quite often they take SE directive as a benchmark. And European systems are considered as something which is worth to follow. In terms of legal framework, so far as I know, only Belarus has legislated the act which is close to European directive or protocol, while other countries, they have some provisions related to SE in their general environmental legislation, or some of the countries, they have an act on state ecological expertise. And definitely the effectiveness of introducing of SCA is highly dependent on political support. If the government wants to introduce the SCA in the country, then it's usually successful. Otherwise, well, after, for example, the pilot SCA was applied, then just the interest declined. So it's very important to identify some, let's say, people or persons or institutions promoting the SCA. UNDP supported a number of study tours to Europe. We had an opportunity to organize some study tour here in Czech Republic, and I think this is a good approach how to show governmental representatives or some high ministry officials how it works in reality, and also to discuss what elements of Czech system or European system can be used when introducing or building up the SCA system in the country. Sometimes there is also not clear understanding of differences between the existing systems and requirements of, or let's say, usual tasks to be done in SCA. So sometimes the ministries or government, they think, well, we already have everything in place, so we do not need to introduce the SCA because we do EA, we have state ecological expertise, so we don't need any other exercise. So it's important to explain them what are the benefits or added value of SCA. And to my experience, also UNDP's experience, it seems that the SCA pilot application is crucial. It's a crucial tool how to introduce the SCA. But I mean, in practice, quite often the countries, they want to start with legislation because they say, well, we need to. Ministry of Environment, for example, says that we need legislation first, otherwise nobody will do the SCA, even as a pilot. But I would say, or what we usually recommend is to start really with practical application, show the benefits, and then after having some experience, you can start to think how it can be addressed in the legal framework. But not always. It doesn't work always. Yes. Thank you for your attention, and once again, sorry for being late.
We've got a few minutes, so are there any questions like that?
Do you have information about Russia?
Well, as far as I know, it's similar what I just described. I mean, they haven't SE law, which would be close to directive or protocol. They do state ecological expertise. It has been applied for some plans, for sectoral plans, because there are two strong systems of planning. Well, in Russia or all other countries, this means sectoral planning, national sectoral planning. They have national programs, and then spatial planning, which is usually at a lower level. In some cases, it's for regions. In some cases, well, in all cases, then for their municipal spatial plans.
Now, I'm curious to hear about what it means to come from this tradition of having a planned economy when you do and introduce SCA. Would you say that it's easier because you know so much about plan making? That's what business was about, right? So it's easy to understand the thing, or easier with such a tradition than if you come from more on a market economy. Would you?
Well, I think it's definitely good to have experience, as we still can remember this time that we have had, we had a planning, central planning economy, and well, I think, yeah, it is such an advantage.
I don't mean for you, but I mean with these countries. I mean, you have worked with SCAs in other countries as well, right? And
Not sure about.
Well, I mean, I don't know because I don't have. Austria doesn't have that background, but we had neighbors, but we have had many neighbors, and I think that the planning in the former Eastern countries were sort of a top-down approach, of course, and there was no room for, let's say, process-driven cooperation or public engagement and or alternatives, for instance, or so. I think it's very different, and I think. Well, we do have, in relation to transboundary SCAs and EAs experience, and I think it's very, and also with Belarus even, and they are, on a formal basis, they are very well organized and it works very well, but when you go into the issue, for instance, of alternatives or of public participation, then it gets difficult. Yeah.
And certainly, in fact, I have, from the brief experience I've had going over to China several occasions and talking to their Environmental Protection Agency, their head of the Environment Agency, was desperately trying to say, I'm not arguing with the 5-year plan, please don't send my family away, but could we just do it slightly environmentally friendlier? And it was interesting watching it sort of try and promote SEAs, not only a way of safeguarding GDP, but also paying attention to the fact that it was China's economy has got itself in a situation where giving the people more money is not going to pay back to the political rulers if they see the quality of life, the quality of the environment deteriorating around them. There's this sort of social tension that was really worrying the government at the time. So SEA aligned with strategic planning was sort of one way to introduce this, but also talking to them. I went out there to give a talk about water management and catchment management, and I ended up talking about how you could use SEA to talk between government institutes, because the SEA practitioners could go into the Ministry of Transport and talk about it, where the Ministry of Transport couldn't talk to the Ministry of Environment because they were in absolute competition with each other. So there are advantages and negatives.
Yeah. Well, I fully agree that one way how to promote the SEA at least in some countries in the region, is to going through the livelihood and poverty reduction and public health, because here in Europe we talk about whether 50 micrograms in cubic meter is enough or 40, but in some countries in the region the land degradation or water pollution it really affects the daily life of people, so you can say, okay, by introducing SEA we might solve some of these problems which are very social sensitive. So
Any more questions for Martin? If not, I'm conscious that it's sort of...
Thank you.
Thank you.